Welcome to the Startup of Human Potential. We're your co-hosts,
I'm Clifton,
and I'm Victoria.
and together we're Faces of the Future. Faces of the Future is a startup studio with a personal development platform at the intersection of consciousness, connection, innovation, and well-being. We're excited to have you join us on our show today.
And today, we're excited to be joined by Ely Glassy Beckman. Thank you so much for coming on our show today. For our listeners, a little bit of background about Glassy. He goes by Glassy. He comes from a music and architecture background, fashion and digital marketing. He's a visionary serial entrepreneur in web development, app development. They've onboarded about 400,000 people into the Web3 space and held the largest NFT-oriented club on Clubhouse. And for the last year and a half, he's been focused on building systems to close the funding and resource gap for entrepreneurs, very much in alignment with our mission at Faces of the Future as well. And that gap includes mentorship and access to vetted professional resources and more. And we'll talk a bit about his different organizations, Glasshouse, the Immersive Agency and Venture Studio, Continuum, which is the private entrepreneurs network focused on blockchain, AI, and edutainment, and Moonriser, which is the media arm telling the story of the builders. So thank you so much for joining us. Really excited to have you on.
Yeah, pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me on. Really love the format that you put together. And it was wonderful to meet each other face to face. It's nice to start there. I think so many of our relationships nowadays, it's whether it's Twitter or Telegram or whatever it might be. So it's great to have collided. It really felt like that in real time, in the real world simulation. And really great to be here. Also, what a nice summary. I'm going to have to go back to the recording and write that down because it's as I've heard it.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, so we met at the Breathe convention in Las Vegas, a convention around emerging tech and how it's disrupting every industry. And Glassy came up to our booth, saw our banner that said Quantumpreneurs, and was like, yeah, I get that. High performers, entrepreneurs, I'm all about that stuff too. So from there, it organically evolved into meeting again in the digital space, continuing the conversation. So I'm excited for what we have in store for our listeners today. And Clifton, if you could kind of steward the rails of the conversation, because there's so many different ways it can go.
So just to present, we just found out that he is a projector as well. So we've got another 3 projector episode headed your way.
Sure.
So just heads up, this might get into some deep rabbit holes or go deep somewhere
Yeah.
and all over the place. But with that being said, I think it's such a clear alignment on so many levels of what we're doing in our venture studio and what you have put together, and really just an ecosystem approach as to how to create the most joyful, high functioning ecosystem to bring us into this new world. And so we can start chronologically and then see how that opens up. But it's not every day you wake up and have multiple projects or multiple companies. How did this happen? Help our listeners get up to this point. I mean, you're in a room with incredible creativity behind you, but have you always been creative? Have you always had many projects? What's been going on?
I say that I've always had a bit of a crippling ambition, meaning like I just have this sense like we could do it all. There's nothing like we don't have to be held back by anything. So I have a tendency of finding really interesting people and saying yes. After 20 years of being an entrepreneur, the power and value of no. And I think even many past co-founders and friends, they say that's actually one of my better qualities is my ability to say no. But just in general, I have many passions. This is actually a quote from a friend of mine. Then, well, if I have had only one interest, my life would be very simple and straightforward. But I have very many interests, and so my life is quite complex, and that's just kind of my burden to bear. But a lot of that comes just out of ambition, and also I could say partially out of seeing the interconnected nature of things. I don't necessarily draw such a firm division between one and the other. I see very much how they interlink and how one affects and benefits the other. And so I could say too, like part of the discussion could also be like from inward to outward. That might be an interesting direction. The one hand being like the self and the mind, the other kind of next level being like clothes and our identity and how we present ourselves. Eventually thinking about like architecture and the places and spaces that we inhabit. And then on a larger scenario, even zooming out, so you're talking about city planning, zooming out even further, you're talking about what are the interconnected nature of relationships and how people connect and when it comes to being an entrepreneur. First of all, how many different things you need to be able to be good at in order to succeed. I think that's a staggering thing. It's like the number's way higher than it really
Yeah.
makes it. It just makes it unrealistic, I think, for a lot of people to accomplish all of those different things. And so we need to connect with other humans. And so the need of connecting with other humans then presents the next level of need. Things like connecting with the right human. Where am I going to find them? What am I going to say to them when I find them to actually start building meaningful relationships to drive this, whatever it is, vision into reality?
Wow, that's fascinating. What brought you to observe the interconnectedness of things? Is it a visual conscious awareness? Is it more the
I think it
knowing?
started. I think it started in architecture school where they encourage things like exponential ideation. Like this isn't what I was expecting, but they had us oftentimes looking at natural phenomena and natural systems and organization and drawing from that principles that we then would put into our designs and projects. And so I think it's really started there. And then I think it really crystallized in my own encountering of Tibetan Buddhists and from that side of engaged Tibetan mantra and practices that kind of cemented that's like more of a knowing rather than like just a concept. Like, no, there truly is. Like all things really are linked.
As you're sharing about observing natural systems and how that flows into architecture, I was picturing the work of Gaudi, Barcelonian architect with the Sagrada Familia, and how everything is nautilus shaped and following the organizing principles of nature, how it all exists out there, and thinking outside the box.
Yeah, they look like they're grown. It's like here's a print, like rather than just like, oh, here's a box, and then we built this next to it. Like his work seemed it was like grown as if it was from nature, or if, like with these kind of fractal patterns.
Yeah,
And I think that
exactly.
applies, like from my standpoint, like that same concept can be expressed in many ways. I think that's a lot of it too. And part of the interconnected nature of things is its expression or emanation. It's like one thing may have all kinds of different expressions. And so
Yeah.
talking about really high level concepts like sovereignty or
Mhm.
equity, the way that can be expressed is so expansive, whether that be in a conversation, whether that be in like branding collateral, or whether that be in like guiding principles for how people operate, build their businesses, interact with each other, design governance. Like you could start naming almost everything and you get this giant list, but they're all really stemming off a central concept of one sort or another.
Awesome. And
Mhm.
let's ground that. Let's talk about those central concepts. What are
Mhm.
some of those organizing principles that you have observed either in nature and architecture in ecosystem design?
The one beautiful parallel is like the idea of mycelial networks and the
Mhm.
idea that there's an overabundance of all things, but it's not necessarily, there might be clumps of it here or abundance of certain nutrients in certain parts of the forest. And it might be
Mhm.
just a little further than the roots could reach of that specific tree that needs that nutrient. So
Mhm.
these vast mycelial networks that actually have an intelligence connect to different organisms and transport nutrients accordingly. For
Mhm.
me, that's like the perfect metaphor for a way to build laterally
Mhm.
among different species that each of them may be strong, but by
Mhm.
having this kind of interconnected network, now you're actually able to do something of a logistic nature of actually transporting. So I think what we're doing in a lot of ways is kind of informed and
Mhm.
parallel to that same expression of what we need is certainly here. We just
Mhm.
might not know the person that has it, or we might not have the relationship equity or the relationship and trust
Mhm.
or way to have the wording to even communicate what our idea is.
Yeah.
A lot of steps to that. But anyway, through that whole process, you're actually able to even successfully do the phenomena to communicate. That means that two different people need to have enough shared
Right.
experiences so that
Yeah.
when you speak, your word is popping in my head and mapping out the same picture that's in your head. That's a phenomenon we over expect that when we talk, everyone knows exactly what we're saying. It's almost more rare the case. And when it comes to a business or an entrepreneur, that's so critical that your meaning is being expressed clearly and that
Mhm.
there is trust that's being built over time. And that through that process, like the mycelial network, that we can make these agreements, that we can have cross organization structures to
Mhm.
transport key resources.
Yeah.
Mentorship. Sometimes that's insight and experience. Sometimes you're just in a situation that you're not often in. Oh, now we have a bigger investor, or now we have to deal with jurisdictions, or any number of things. And how are we going to deal with that? Well, if you had access to the right mentors, then they can swoop in and, like in a just-in-time scenario, they can come in, school you with their maybe decades of experience to give you that, sharpen your pencil on that exact area. So sometimes it's information, sometimes it's resources like capital, it's from things like who am I going to hire? Or that could be vendors or employees or partners. How am I going to get my word out there? How am I going to get exposure? These are all key things that relate to both communication, shared resources, and the logistic of actually accomplishing what I would consider maybe the finest art or the most difficult art, being the art of business.
Yeah, an expansion as you're talking about, like, putting the resources in the mycelial network and having it flow through to where it's supposed to go and permeate throughout the globe, and it's perfect metaphor for what you've built with your different companies.
To have exposure, even if you have a ton of money and hire expensive marketing firms and whatnot, you still might not get, there's not like an exposure button.
If you could share some of your stories of helping onboard over 250,000 people into Web3, what were some of the lessons?
Perfect storm. Curiosity. I think that a lot of it was curiosity among a very diverse group of people that seem to also have a tremendous amount of time on their hands. So a lot of people with a lot of time on their hands that are very curious, and maybe a lot of misfits. I'm only saying misfits, like I think a lot of aliens, maybe we know how to fit in, but we don't really feel like we belong. Like there's a lot of that kind of feeling. So anyway, that's the perfect storm. And then plus a new-ish platform, which was Clubhouse at the time, that was operating on invite only. So now it's what I'm trying to say, relationship equity that's involved, because you can't even get into the platform if you don't know someone that's there. And then once they bring you into the platform, they're semi-responsible for you, because if you like misbehave and get kicked out, I think they got kicked out too. Like it was that kind of situation. Like accountability. There was a social thing of people inviting each other. They also invited niche industries. So there's like really strong film presence. There was a really strong music, so you could say the culture makers of the world at a time during the pandemic when everyone was essentially grounded and looking for something to do. Now, what is the most fun thing to do as an adult? Essentially, is to meet new people, meet people that have the answer to the question that you've been asking, and through a social audio format, people had the opportunity to ask questions and hear the answer and hear without judgment. On the one hand, it was like the visual judgments that we always have, like, oh, you're pretty, you're too young, like all these things that like we immediately jump to. So you have no visual, but just audio. You can hear the authenticity in people's voices. And somehow with that plus an algorithm, we were able to essentially have 500 to 1,000 people a day for any given like session that we were running, have people and a very wide stream of new audience on a regular basis, and a very high stickiness factor where people are day after day after day, month after month. And so real time, or not in real time, accelerated time, essentially, relationships were able to be galvanized and were able to spring up in like fast motion, like claymation, like you were just fast forwarding the whole thing. And so like these rapid communities were able to be grown because, and even the buildup of it and the kind of the pullback from that platform in particular, as they made certain decisions and opened up the platform. Some of the simple changes that they made, you could say, kind of ruined the platform. A lot of people left. And so there was a special time that doesn't exist there, or maybe many places still. But it just goes to show, when you do have that alignment of people with time on their hands, because it wasn't just me that educated 400,000 people. There were co-hosts that were running rooms. If I was running them 10 hours a day, someone else was running other rooms 5 hours. If I was running the morning room, someone else was running the afternoon room. It was a host of people that probably, if they knew each other, or as they got to know each other, they realized, like, do we really want to work together? Maybe not. But in this little moment of time where you had no judgment, you had curiosity, you had questions being asked and answered, through that is how we got to those kind of numbers organically with zero advertising.
Yeah, and it was a time when the world became very passionate and tuned into what's going on in Web3 and crypto as well. 2020, 2021, the bull market.
That's beautiful. And that's actually part of the process we run people with in the Foundries. We talk about different levels of manifestation, and talking at the highest level, like everyone wants abundance or peace or good health, things like that. But the difference is become in the nuances of grounding it more into the physical 3D realm. And exactly as you said, once you start to interact with people and have conversations at those more refined levels of a distinction of three-dimensional roles, responsibilities, and actually creation, that's when the fragmentation might occur and people go in different ways. Similar vision, but different pathways to get there.
The boundaries are a process for grounding business concepts and business ideas from more macro and full alignment to more specificity and roles, responsibilities, as Clifton just mentioned. So I just wanted to chime in and presence that.
And so taking that metaphor, what happened or what did you do after all the lessons and the growth from Clubhouse? How have you continued to ground that down into what you're doing now?
Well, the first thing I did was try to recreate it on Twitter, and the alignment was just different. Like, you don't have the same pieces on the board. You don't have the same algo, even if the same people, the same content, the same programming, like so much of the same. We're going to just redo what we just did. Nope.
Copy paste.
Further past the pandemic, no support. If anything, that felt like the opposite. I'm like, this censorship feels familiar, and we just did it relentless. They're like, oh, be consistent. Right? I was saying that. How do you be successful? I'm like, consistency. Clearly, well, we were consistent as the Dickens. Even after like 250 consecutive shows, Monday through Friday, 2 to 3 hours, and it was great. We got everything recorded. There was like still new life from that. But it didn't grow into the entrepreneurial community that I had expected. Yeah, different app, different animal, different game. It's like you might be the best soccer player in the world, but then you go to play football, or worst cross sport metaphor. You might go to play baseball, and you just are terrible. You're like, you might be great at shooting a basketball, but you cannot hit that baseball to save your life. That might be the situation. But anyway, we carried the community forward. That like just raw determination and a lot of lessons learned. Also, I think a lot of it too is respecting how powerful an algorithm can be. Like, you don't know how good you have it until you have it bad for a while, and then you're like, oh damn, this algorithm could actually save humanity or keep us actually like turn the ones that have real messages into only getting those messages heard by echo chambers versus actually getting them heard by a global audience of people that were so, I hate to say the word desperate, but we're just so thirsty for that knowledge, just so thirsty to know about what is an NFT, what is a blockchain, how does this even work, what are these gas fees, like what is it, how do I use a bridge, why would I need to use a bridge, what is a L2 versus a L1, a lot of fundamental stuff. And it was funny because in the early days we would always circle back around like a wave, and then it would get so complex into like account abstraction or like something so complex, and then someone would come on stage and just ask a question like, yeah, but what is an NFT? And then it would start the cycle around. And I swear that went on for like a year. That cycle like spun like circle around for about a solid year.
Wow.
Maybe a bit older, even more than that. But that's where Glasshouse was born originally, as an accelerator. Get back to answering your question, was launching this accelerator called Glasshouse to carry a group of artists through a multi-month program of developing something collectively. I'm like, if we got 100 of us together, we couldn't fail. That was my thought. And we did. We had 144, 150 people or something signed up for the accelerator. We carried a bunch through. There was definitely fall off over the months. We built a story world. And from that, another brand was born. Actually, two brands, one being the Glasshouse name, which brought in a lot of clients and was dealing with the client services. Because I'll tell you something, when you have a thriving, teaming community gathering every day, and naturally occurs from that is entrepreneurs coming up and saying, what is it going to take to get in front of your audience? Can you help me launch a project? You're answering all these questions for free and building community and doing these kind of like public service things, but can we hire you to help us launch our projects? And that's really where Glasshouse got its footing, clients and helping launch projects, the multi-million-dollar, drops and successes under its belt.
Wow, this is amazing, and this is like from a fire hose we're drinking, and it's awesome. I love it. So I just also want to presence a few really powerful things that hopefully our listeners caught. One is you had incredible success on Clubhouse, and then you took that same model and you applied it to a different platform and didn't have anywhere near the amount of success. correct?
Mhm.
This idea of, oh, be consistent on social media, be consistent. And you're basically saying you were consistent and
Yeah.
the results weren't there.
Like 10 hours a day. You know what it is? Being consistent doesn't help you if you're consistently doing things that aren't helping you.
Yes.
That's such a
Um,
great point.
we had value, but it wasn't the community growth that we were aiming for. We were like aiming for community growth. And
Mhm.
instead we got an incredible growth of content. And not to
Right.
say our rooms didn't get any audience. We were growing. Sometimes we would hit 150, we would hit some hundreds. Sometimes we would break into the thousands, but it was intermittent. And then sometimes we would have a few dozen. I'm like, we're doing all of this work and hours of prep and all of these things, inviting guests in. Yeah, when you're doing live, it's different when you do a podcast. It doesn't matter how many people show up because you can broadcast and syndicate and all these things. But
Mhm.
in Twitter format or in live audio, you want to invite people in. That was another thing in Twitter, like people seem to want to listen. Although I guess I could thank Twitter in some ways of refining my ability to monologue. They're like, we don't want to come on stage. We're not going to come. We're not going to come in and we're only going to be listeners. We're not going to be speakers. So it just forces you to speak more.
Wow.
But yeah, it's true. What you're underpinning is correct. Just moving over to a different platform, you're not necessarily going to get the same results. And if you're consistent, but consistently not doing the right things, then it
Mhm.
doesn't matter. If you're not getting 1,000 a day, then you're never going to move it to 2 or 5,000.
Wow.
Mm.
And so then did you iterate how you were showing up on Twitter or did you take it off?
We did a lot of things. Probably one of the things I didn't really, I don't even want to go down that road, but I didn't go on a lot of other very popular spaces to get
Mhm.
on their stage to shill our show. I probably
Mhm.
could have done more of that. I just didn't. I'm like, I don't know. I like to move authentic and natural. That just didn't feel natural to try to shill what I was doing on other people's platform. We're doing it, and we helped a lot of people, and there were a lot of great stories, and the archive that we built was incredible. So that's where Moonriser built into actually being an outlet as a media outlet and creating a website, moonriser.io, where we
Mhm.
can these not only are there access to all those recordings from all those shows,
Yeah.
so ongoing arts like telling the deeper story of builders and maybe builders that wouldn't be able to otherwise get exposure. That's part of my thought. Exposure's been so hard. What if we made that a public good? What if we
Mhm.
make public good to find great stories of founders that might not have millions and millions of dollars to burn on marketing, but are building incredible protocol level solutions or whatever it might be. And so that's where Moonriser essentially evolved into more of a web platform and less of these Twitter spaces and expecting a Twitter community.
Okay, so then you took it into sort of your own hands off of the algorithm of Twitter and created your own community and you applied certain lessons that you learned through the stages of the massive growth of Clubhouse to the what's going on with Twitter to your own creation and community.
I think it's easy to underestimate the variables at play.
Mhm.
Oh, I'm doing all these same things. And then why is it not working over here? You're underestimating so many things of how we were.
Like the world opened back up again and
Well, it
people
was the variables of how is Twitter going to see me?
Mm.
How are the bots and the algorithm of Twitter going to see me?
Uh-huh.
I wasn't thinking about that. I just jumped in. Now I'm with all the degens in Twitter, thinking oh, I'm with the collectors and the degens. But next to I probably through that process of getting involved in certain collections, promoting those collections, getting a lot of followers from different NFTs that I was holding and buying and those kind of situations. I'm fairly confident in retrospect. What I essentially was doing was telling all the algorithm, hey, look at me like I'm a degen. All I care about is NFTs. All I'm doing, you know what I mean? I was giving it the wrong signals. I was
Mhm.
coming into this new platform, giving it the signals to say, I'm a thought leader. I have something to tell this specific audience.
Mhm.
With the entrepreneurs focused on Web3 and blockchain. If I was coming in with those signals right from the get, I would have likely had vastly different results. But that's retrospect. But again, just that simple variable of how are you communicating with the platform that you're in, specifically the words you're using and the messages you're using, and a lot of how it's going to track you forever, or
Mhm.
6 months of trying to do something different before it puts you in a different category.
Yeah, I love how you're connecting this with what you talked about at the beginning of being that mycelial network to be able to communicate with certain people or coaches. It almost sounds like you're like a coach to speak to the bot or to the algorithm.
The algorithm whisperer.
Yeah.
I'm
Uh-huh.
still trying to figure it out. I'm more like the person that only knows English, but I got dropped in like Madrid and like everyone speaks Spanish. And I'm like using hand symbols to try to figure it out.
And I think that you're not alone. I think a lot of people are trying to understand how to play in these worlds and the algorithms. And the classic is the Google
Mhm.
algorithm. They always change it every so often. So you think you got something, but now you got more to learn and adapt.
Yeah. We had a previous guest on our show, Cherie Alexander, who was talking about presence-based marketing, how some people are really good at the algorithm thing, so they know how to do that social media thing, and then there's other people who are really good at the presence thing.
Yeah, I'm
And
on the present side.
I would say we are too.
Yeah, I'm on the present side. Cool other things that happened was, all right, I was talking about people meeting each other without judgment. I'm not even going to go down the thing of all the different judgments that we make every day, biases that we have, whatever it is, too short, too tall, hair is too long, whatever it might be. So people started to get familiarity. They knew each other's voices because they were listening. That's probably
Mhm.
another thing people don't often do. We talk, but do we really listen? Now you're cultivating this new sense of listening.
Mhm.
And pretty quickly, it came into a situation where we started planning events. This spanning off your last mention of presence marketing. So
Mhm.
pretty we moved right into events, and some of the best moments we had was meeting people for the first time, but feeling like you had known them so long, feeling
Yeah.
like your biggest supporter or your brother from another mother or whatever it might be. Just incredible human beings and really diverse, and it didn't take very long, a few months before we were planning massive series of really elaborate events. That's where I shine. That's one of the areas where I shine, is creating those events. And then a lot of that comes from fashion and
Mhm.
fashion shows. Some of the hardest production work you can do, in my opinion. So from there, it's like create real experiences. And then when you're meeting people, you're hearing their voice, and now there's familiarity, and you're so excited to meet people. That's a whole vibe, as
Mhm.
opposed to a networking event where you just walk in, you never met anyone, you never heard their voice. It's awkward. There's just social tension and friction you haven't cut through yet. So yeah, present. I think that's what it's all about, really, getting people together to really face to face.
And these
Mhm.
events, you mentioned a theme of diversity and compared to the echo chamber. Were these events an expression of that diversity as well?
The first show we put together, the first art show we put together, had 70 artists in I think 6 continents. I don't even know how many countries, but it was just this massive array of really high level artwork. That was
Mhm.
an expression of that. The people that were there, the people that were involved, the people that were helping move the needle on things, the people that were at the events themselves, and flying in from all over the place.
Wow.
I remember when we connected on a call a couple of weeks before this podcast, you mentioning some kind of road trip tour of different events and festivals. That's something of that nature too?
Yeah, there's actually a couple things. One is as part of Continuum, our private entrepreneurs network, is that we're connected with a lot of event producers,
Mhm.
including Coin Agenda and a number of others. So we use these as regular, like periodic meetups. And so people might be flying in to LA or flying into Vegas or Miami. Those are our 3 main cities for these different types of events. And so, like, about once a month or so, we have these as an opportunity for people to actually meet face to face,
Mhm.
build whatever, sign deals, help. It's like an accelerated matchmaking opportunity. So
Mhm.
we've definitely carried that play from the playbook forward and keep running it. Whether that be activations or just simply being present there, or very, very integral to actually
Mhm.
producing the programming of the stage. Like for
Yeah.
Breathe, we produced the digital assets stage, the whole 2 days. Like every speaker we had selected and curated, and we're doing
Mhm.
all the side chats and everything. Yeah. So
Awesome. What is one of your activations? That's like an immersive experience at the event?
favorite ones was one that we did at Basel, that Story World project that I was talking about, where we had all the artists sign up for the accelerator from Glasshouse. We brought that out as a stealth launch. We rented 5 yachts, and we had 5 yacht captains drive in succession the boats down the Miami River. And along
Mhm.
the river, we had AR exhibits placed on the banks
Wow.
along the river that was relevant to our story world. Like we did like the whole river as if it was a natural history museum, and these
Mhm.
AR activations were cited to say like this building 3,000 years ago housed like a temple of the that related to the story, and it would just So that was probably one of my favorite ones that we've done.
That sounds magical.
Together, like they all got tied together. So we had 5 yachts together. Everyone's just dancing and jumping and swimming, and then the sun went down and we went on a little cruise, and it felt like you were in a video game by nighttime.
Wow.
Cruising around at night is like the best thing in the world. Top level experiences. I was like, we're in a video game. I kept yelling. Yeah.
I just love how this progression, you've sort of reduced human experience to just voice, and then through your journey, you've gone all the way to AR infused events in an immersive, transformative world. And I'd love to hear, now that we've had that through line established, what's your favorite part of creating transformative experiences?
I think it's just the feeling you get when you're there. It's like the best feeling. It's like among the best feelings, like real human connection, like doing something you haven't done before. Also, it's almost immediately a way that you're trying to do something that's so difficult on so many levels that it's like pushing you past the point of what's possible,
Yeah.
pushing you past the point of what's like physically maybe even good for you. Like, I can't even tell you, by the time it was the day of, how tired I was. I was like, I didn't just like pick what flag are we gonna fly on which yacht. I remember like looking in the bag like, I don't even have what it takes to just pick up these few flags right now. But somehow you dig deep enough that you get past that. So it's like, I love this one quote. I'll probably misquote it, but it's like, when the strength of a man runs out, it's his will that sustains him. Something along those lines. And it's true. Like, you expose like what really matters, what relationships will crumble under that level of pressure, what people thrive or kind of rise to the occasion, maybe find even a strength that they didn't know they had. So I think there's a lot of levels of just, first of all, doing challenging things. But when the details are right and you're actually executing, and you might have been in pain the whole time, but then by the time you actually like get to the top of the mountain, step was somehow worth it. And it's really the people. It's like the life moments. That's what I call them. Like, what is the cost, or what is the price of a life moment? Something that you'll never forget. Like, because of you and the people that were there, like the relationships were deepened. Or even if you never talk to them, you just know that no matter, anytime you see them in the future, they'll never forget either. Like, that wasn't like, oh, it was another night at the club. You're like, no one had another probably day in their whole life where they were on with that group of people in that time. Like, it was just special. It was just a special time. Yeah, people remember it. And there's just something about that feeling that continues to drive me. Like, I want to make more of those. We had a track of trying to outdo our Art Basel. That was actually during Art Basel, during like the VIP days of Art Basel. So every year we're like, how do we outdo ourselves? But we already set the bar kind of high. We figured it out.
Yeah. I can relate to your, like, when your strength runs out, like, dig in and find the will. Ooh, I've been there many times for sure, and I know Clifton has as well. And sometimes, like, in that chaos, incredible magic can happen, is what we're seeing with a lot of presence-based experiences and immersive experiences like that. It's like, when you come in with such a clear intention and center of what you wanna create from that experience, you kinda harmonize and find those aligned people, and you find ways to meet each other in the crowds of chaos, the throngs of people. And, I've experienced that at Burning Man, different festivals, conventions. Absolutely.
It's like being like going through a battle with someone. Like, the relationships you build in that circumstance is just different than like your circumstance.
Yeah.
It's a nice park. You're like, okay. Oh, we're hanging out at the beach. You're like, okay. You're like,
Yeah.
remember that time when we didn't sleep together? Like, we didn't sleep at all, or like however long it was. And you're like, yeah, man, best times of our life. Like, builds a deeper relationship. It teaches you more about yourself. That's part of your identity. That's part of your strength. It's like another badge of honor that you get to wear for yourself. And those are all, I guess that's just what's come. Also, it's just crazy enough. I'm like, when you start planning it, it seems like it's going to be easy. And then when you actually go to do it, you realize how hard. If you knew it was going to be that hard, you probably
would have said no. Expanding moments. Yeah. At the Breathe convention, we originally got a 20 by 20 booth. And then they were like, how would you guys like another space to double
No, it was
your
10
booth
by
size?
10.
We're like 10 by 10 originally.
And then a few days, you want that doubled.
Like, just in case you
And then,
didn't, just in case
and then the weekend before, they're like, how do you want that doubled space doubled? So 4x. So we're like, what?
You're like,
So-
that sounds great, but That's
Well,
4x the printing, 4x the moving, 4x the body.
wow.
Yeah.
So we have to rise to the occasion and do like that accelerated expansion. Called up Dr. Vibe. We're like, hey, do you have more vibroacoustic therapy beds for our immersive experience? We have like our one booth planned out. Now we have two booths. So we could make what we want of it, just to create that kind of rejuvenation station experience for the convention goers. So it was like we didn't sleep. Everything was
Yeah,
done that
we were
weekend
in the
before.
car ride on the way to Vegas, and Dr. Vibe was maybe not coming. We had to convince him and hold the note, and that's really
Wouldn't take no
what
for an answer.
I
Yeah, and that I swear that's when your will really matters. You're like, no, I have the will for this person to come. Like, I have more will for them to come than they even have.
We're like, "Your life will change if you come." A
And I
life
love what you
will
said
go
too, is
your whole
it brings relationships closer that lean
life.
into that, and it demonstrates the strength or lack thereof of other relationships that you thought was
Yeah.
close. That trial by fire. And we have one client who she continuously puts on these events that just seem to be that kind of expansive experience with ridiculous timelines, and like, how is this at all gonna come together?
Right.
And she's like, it just does. There's just
And,
some
like, no
magic.
budget, usually, or, like, minimal budget. Yeah.
I saw a data, or I heard from someone, this is really just secondhand information, but they said out of all the most stressful jobs, at least according to this one particular poll, the 100 most stressful jobs in America, that event producer falls number 6. So, which I can kind of see, like, it is really stressful.
Yeah.
And I felt like I hit a fork in the road at one point where I was like, look, I'm going to burn myself out again. I've already done this so many times as an entrepreneur. I'm going to burn myself out again. Totally.
Mhm.
So I need to pick a left or a right. I have a fork in the road, double down on events or double down on consulting and the entrepreneur side. But you can't really do both. And after probably 6 months of deciding on the consulting arm, I was like, that was the worst decision. I should have stayed with events. That was like clearly the
It
better way to go. And sure
Yeah.
enough, that popped back up on the radar and has been a pretty consistent mainstay. And I would say probably how can I say this? Like, the best things that are happening right now, business wise, because of relationships and people that we've met there in
And
person at these different events that are so wild, rather than just tell, oh, I could just do it on Telegram. I could just do it on Twitter. Or,
Mhm.
when you have those life experiences, you realize it's so limiting to be audio only. It's so
Mhm.
limiting to be on another company's algorithm.
Mhm.
And face-to-face events, critical part of how we grow as an entrepreneur.
I'm gonna let the algorithm of the universe guide me. Where am I supposed to go? Who's supposed to find me?
It's like that. Suddenly you have to use I swear, I'm home. I'm lazy. I live on an island. I don't even want to leave my island. I was like walk to the beach. Like, we walk a lot, so it's not like we're lazy that we don't want to walk around. I don't want to drive other places. But then you go to eat Denver. Suddenly you're an operative. You're like a secret operative. Like, you have to use your intuition. Like, all these faculties have to come online to be like in the right
Yeah.
place, right time, to meet the right people, to choose the
Mhm.
right restaurants. Like, every little thing. Suddenly your intuition. I feel like
Uh,
I'm in the matrix.
absolutely.
That's awesome. And this is a thread of human potential, right? And our podcast, this is the startup of human potential. And so, how do we continue to cultivate and expand on our human potential? And with that, I'm curious, what does human potential mean to you?
I think I'd like to believe that it's the potential to do things peacefully. That it's a potential to do like to actually achieve harmony. What did you use a great word earlier? I don't know if it was congruence or just like being on the same page, or even if you're not on the same page, that you have a way to still coexist. Like, I think peace. I think really like that. Support, collaboration, advocacy of each other, of one another, like actually supporting each other. Like, the idea of individuality was like way over promoted,
Mhm.
and more like we were talking about earlier, like interdependence. If it
Mhm.
was a bit more focus on that, I think we'd be further and
Mhm.
realize like the actions and choices that we make really do affect other people. With the benefit of having that experience with Clubhouse and the algorithm and growing these massive clubs and regularly having stages of over 1,000 people, and of them, like, every single person was getting it. Come speak, come speak. It would be like hilarious. We'd have hundreds of people that have the ability to unmic and speak at the same time. And
Mhm.
yet, out of that, we cultivated a different sense where people actually had to listen so they knew when they could speak without getting moved down to the audience, like without getting moved off the ability, not being on stage and not being able to speak. You just saw literally $1 million successes pop off on a regular basis. When people had a voice, when they had an ability to be on a stage with even just a few hundred people on a regular basis, after about 3 to 6 months, that person had enough support behind them for them to see personal prosperity.
Wow.
It was like a prosperity machine, the
Yeah.
likes of which I always dreamed of, but didn't know if it was possible. Definitely hadn't witnessed before. But then after that, it hasn't been the same, right? It's not every other, oh, so and so broke $1 million on their sales of their art, or so and so, this other group had another literally, it was like $1 million successes were happening on a regular basis. It was just the case of the matter. And it just goes to show what local support can do, even in the quantity of a few hundred or a few thousand people that would band together, how economic impact was able to be achieved.
That's beautiful.
Leverage.
But
Yeah.
now it's not like that. Now everyone suffers. It's like, if you guys would just get together, a little bit more support, like a little less of a reason why to go your separate ways. And this also occurred to say earlier, is like when you have a family, like your brother might do something you don't like. And at some point you're like, we got to get over it because we're blood. We're family. We have to get over it. But I think a lot of people on the internet, they don't feel that. They're like, I could just run my own separate way. The slightest like inconvenience or the slightest friction, I'm just going to go my own separate way. But the pain, or I should say the price that we pay for just going off in our own direction, is that a lot of people don't find that economic prosperity or social prosperity of having more advocates and more supporters and more ability to get their artwork seen. It's so basic. You're like, people aren't really asking for like that much. Like, can I make some artwork and 1,000 people see it? Like, we're not even asking for like 1,000 people to go buy it. Like, can we get out of 10,000 of my followers? Could I get even 1,000 people to see what I post? The answer is generally not. Generally, no, that is not the case. But the opposite being true, that if they could, then they would see that prosperity. If people leaned in, even to the quantity of 1,000 people, you'd actually see economies bursting open.
Yeah. 1,000 true fans, right?
Yeah, I love this duality of, the way in which the relationship is formed correlates to the stability of that relationship in the long haul. So if it's a very quick add, oh, let me just add this person, follow this person, well, then it's a very quick unfollow this person, versus like, oh man, we went through the ringer here, we committed to this experience, and now we have this deep relationship. Then, hey, you can be yourself, and challenges may arise in a relationship, but we'll still have those ties. That's a really potent thing, especially for coming together in transformative technologies and in communities. The oversaturation of all these pockets of community that you can be a part of and then leave from, walk away from. And so it's like, how do you build a solid foundation of relationships that you can actually have challenging experiences to empower the shift that we're all calling forth? So how are you incorporating that in all that you're doing with Continuum and with just all these experiences you've cultivated? Was your architecture program very intense as well? I know at USC it was crazy.
Like, we literally were up 26 hours a day. Right? A regular night was sleeping a half hour before class, literally under your desk on a piece of cardboard.
Wow.
And that was just that was normal. Like, that wasn't oh, this one crazy kid does this. It was like, no, that was just a normal thing.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so
Actually, yeah, I should have answered it like that. You asked about ambition. Yeah, they just trained us wrong. They trained us to have more projects than we could ever really handle. Like, the silver lining of that is for you to know how to prioritize and move things forward accordingly, because life is mayhem. Yeah, being an entrepreneur there's so much chaos for you to have to cut through. But yeah, it was just so much work. Like, we could have just had our design class, and that would have been enough work to be up 20 hours out of every day. But we had 5 classes. So there's 4 other classes that also need 10 to 20 hours a day to stay on top of. That was and it was a 5-year program.
Wow.
So yeah, it's really intense.
Out there training ground for sure.
It's so crazy. I wouldn't just do that. I was also doing like extracurricular, launching a company even then, and doing cultural events and giant art shows and art and jazz events where we would bring musicians and have art decked
Oh,
out all over the club or the lounge or whatever. It was all over Lower East Side. And I don't know, I was just doing a lot of things even while
yeah.
I was in school.
I'm curious as you're sharing this, what kind of cultivated you to that point, about your upbringing, like how many activities and school and things you balanced back then? Because, it starts young.
It was just always an overachiever, maybe just
Mhm.
maybe under challenged.
A high
I don't know.
performer.
You could say it like that. I learned easy. I could say it like that. I'm a fast learner. I was always a fast learner. So
Mhm.
school was easy. Did really well on tests and was always looking for a bigger challenge. And generally, that was not met up until architecture school. And I was like,
Mhm.
whoa, okay, this is
Yeah.
even more than I was bargaining for.
Yeah, I felt that way about high school. I went to a specialized engineering and science and technology high school, and up until that point, I didn't feel super challenged. And then I had all these extracurricular activities on top of that too. And I honestly experienced my first burnout back then in
Oh
high
yeah,
school.
I think it took a solid decade to get over college, like even just
Wow.
sleep deprivation and otherwise.
Wow.
Wow. So you've had these transformative experiences. Certainly, architecture school, 5 years of it was intense. Now you have these events, these pop ups that come around. What's next for you?
Well, part of it is wisening up a little. So instead of like being the one that's producing the entire event from the conception all the way through execution,
Mhm.
we are leveraging the kind of mycelial network. Like they would connect to the oak trees and they would connect to the ferns. So the process of that being implemented is with Continuum, we're connected with a lot of event producers. Let
Mhm.
them take that number 6 most stressful job. We'll do the VIP, bring all the investors, or we'll add to the guest list, or we'll add to it, add value, and
Mhm.
bring nice amenities so that we can first of all look out for our membership and either
Mhm.
giving them discounts, getting them into the right rooms, knowing the right after parties to go to, those kind of things. Again, with a high priority of getting people face to face and a high priority of building relationships, events is just something we need to be doing or
Mhm.
integrated with in one way or another. So
Mhm.
the way we do that now is actually letting other people that are experts and have that entire focus
Mhm.
do their focus, and we bring the additional layers of value.
Yeah.
And what's next? It's interesting because it's some of the people I've talked to, even in the last week or two, have reminded me about my bigger mission. I think in a lot of ways I've changed how I talk about what I do in
Mhm.
order to be understandable to a wider audience or just to more people in general. So instead of talking like brain busting ambitions of like wealth redistribution, I talk about the resource gap. I'm like,
Mhm.
well, there's a resource gap. And then instead of talking about it for the whole world, I talk about it like for entrepreneurs. Even
Mhm.
though it's a fractal system, and again, it's a different type of an expression, bigger ambition really is wealth redistribution. Is really protocol level solutions, automation, leveraging the technology and the culture that we have
Mhm.
to bring about a more equitable system, a more equal system, a system where people actually can gain access to information, that can gain access to each other in terms of the right counterparts. And that could be done in an intelligent way, digitally and in real life. Some of the new projects that I probably don't even have the clearance to talk about necessarily, but to answer your question, is to start expressing this continuum. And this is part of what we're calling for Continuum 2030. By
Mhm.
2030, this is what we'd like to see in effect is a real life network where there's physical buildings and structures that are tying together these incubation kind of centers where people in a living environment can tap into these resources, much like we're doing that in a digital and virtual way currently. So
Mhm.
instead of just a moment of like once a month or 2 days out of the month to be at a conference, those entrepreneurs that elect it, that they could actually live in an environment where they're doing this. They're living and breathing it, and they're
Mhm.
surrounded by key resources and support
Mhm.
to give them the edge on launching a successful product.
Kind of like creating hubs or nodes in different spaces that have been identified as big community followings.
Exactly. I mean, like live work situations.
Yeah, Clifton and I ran a conscious entrepreneur co-working, co-living space for about 3 years in Topanga, just outside Los Angeles, and
So I
yeah.
need to talk you maybe you could talk me out of it. You're like, listen, don't do that.
We can share our lessons for sure. And all the different new beliefs that came from that for how we would do things differently, just like, you learned from your experiences switching over from Clubhouse to Twitter Spaces and how some things carry over, some things don't fully.
Right.
So, but it's all about the frequency and the culture that is being cultivated in that type of community because, several people could be working on a similar mission creating these nodes, but each one has its own distinct flavor and distinct message and offering, and it'll resonate with a different type of community for sure.
Absolutely. It's interesting hearing you speak. It reminds me of a couple other things. One is like, what was I doing before blockchain? Part of what I was doing before trying to learn about NFTs was working with economic development associations, working with
Wow.
chambers of commerce, working with regional economic development up here in the Northeast,
Mhm.
and on a state level, on a regional level, and really asking questions like, how do we build incredible communities? How do we add resilience and sense of equity and all these things in real life communities? How do we restore main streets? Other things like even in my personal life with my family, like really seeking and questing for a quote unquote community. We live in a place of either co-working or co-living or whatever. We tried so many things. We went on a 10,000-mile journey to go visit all these different communities, intentional communities and otherwise, from
Oh,
POWs all the way, all over the place, earth ships and all these things. And I'll tell you, out of all the places we looked, we did not find what we were looking for.
mm.
So either we have to keep looking and it's somewhere else. Maybe it's in Costa Rica, maybe it's somewhere else, or we need to. I think,
Yeah.
and I also homeschool my kids, two of my
Wow.
children. We homeschool, and connecting with a homeschool community has been probably the first expression since our little amazing Clubhouse blip on the radar.
Mhm.
Probably the first community of real life, at least face to face real life community, where I'm like, wow, here these other parents are cultivating the same values in their children.
Mhm.
Amazing. And
Yeah.
there's like, I don't know, a few dozen families or something like that. So it's not a massive, massive community, but even still, you're like, oh no, this is it. Like this is the look and feel, and this is what that thing smells like.
Definitely. That's exactly what a lot of entrepreneurs do. You go around and you try to find the thing that you came up with an idea to create, and you're like, well, it doesn't exist. Does that mean I'm supposed to create it? We hear that
That's
all the
why that's another answer to your earlier question. Why am I building so many things? Because I looked for them and I couldn't find them, and I had to just make it for my own. I
time.
needed a hammer and I didn't have one, so I had to make a hammer.
Yep.
Nice. And how unique is that perspective? Do you find that you attract a lot of people in that similar view of life, or
I think it's a very rare quality. I think if anything, we're like conditioning machines, and we're really exceptional at one thing, which is being conditioned.
Yeah.
And based on our circumstance and context and conditioning, you get
Mhm.
our output. Like that would be my summary for humanity. And most people haven't gone through a conditioning that would yield them to think like a engineer or inventor, or they might think like it. They're like, oh, I had this cool idea. It just
Mhm.
lingers. But their real overriding conditioning is like seek safety and find happiness in routines, and sameness is good and difference is bad, right? Like little simple thing like that. Like even if they think differently, like fight them. And I think to some degree that's even biologically programmed. Certainly
Okay.
the conditioning can go in either way. Like there's these kids are really kind. Like
Mhm.
granted, they'll push each other down. They're playing football. It's not like no, it's perfect, but someone sees that someone else didn't have a lunch and their kid, their parents not even there. They reach in their bag and they're like, hey, you want this? Hey, Johnny, you want this? Like these are real kids. They're looking out for each other. They're like really like this is what humanity could be like. So
Yeah.
yeah, I'm driven by that. I'd like to see more of that.
Yeah, and I love that you're homeschooling your kids because that conditioning is present in schools, so you can choose how to cultivate your children rather than what the default mode is.
Yeah.
And it's great to find a community of others that are doing that very similar thing because we're brought up with that mindset that you just talked about of like seek safety, seek
Yeah.
approval because we're tribal
Yeah,
beings.
we need sameness.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not the same, it's not good. And that's not that actually is the post kind of mentality. And
Mhm.
I swear if even without getting out of the conspiracy theories, it's become a handicap for our evolution as a
Mhm.
species, whether it be for entrepreneurs, or be how we educate. In my opinion, some of the worst things that could ever happen are war. And if wars are happening, then we need to look at the cause of those type of things and start reverse engineering all the way down to how children are raised, words that we're using, the imagery, the media. Like, it's a culture wide thing, and it's a global thing, and we don't want one culture and one thing, but we do need to find a way to coexist. Like, I'll just or another, whether that be among 5 kids in a classroom or a dozen kids or 100 in a Clubhouse room or 1,000 people in a Twitter space or whatever it might be. Just that idea of finding commonality and finding a way for people to have experiences that evolve them, like they get to evolve, but it's not because someone else is suffering or being left out or being cut out of the picture. Like, so I guess that's a lot of what drives me, is just to create the framework that can operate like that without creating a doctrine that forces people to do it one way or another.
Right.
Playground, and then if you want to go on the slide, you go there. If you want to go on the swings, you go there. But our playground is more like, if you need funding resources, over to the left. If you need mentorship, over to the right.
Awesome. It very much sounds like your definition of human potential earlier about coexisting and peace. So, what's the best way for people to connect with you if they're an entrepreneur looking for resources or people wanting to learn more about the Web3 space?
Probably the top 2 channels that I spend a lot of time on is Twitter at Glassy Music, and the same for Telegram at Glassy Music. Our key websites where you can get a ton of information as an entrepreneur about our journey, about how to connect and just build successful businesses, is our media outlet, moonriser.io, just like it sounds, moonriser.io. Glasshouse is our venture studio website and the immersive arm of what we're doing. The website there is Glasshouse. It's spelled like the German Bauhaus, so it's GlassHaus.io. And for the private business network, the website there to get more information is thecontinuum.network. So it's a .network is the domain, thecontinuum.network. From there, different ways of getting direct access. There's contact there that will find its way to my team. That'll definitely lead directly to me. But if you wanted to reach out to me straight away, Twitter or Telegram is a perfect way to do that.
Awesome. And any last words you want to share with the listeners before we wrap up?
I would just like to say thank you again. This is really probably the last direction or conversation I was expecting to have. Although I don't know what conversation was I expecting to have. We do so much networking, and usually I spend the entire conversation just talking about what you summarized in like 30 seconds. I was like, oh, great, we got that over with. Now we get to have a real conversation because I don't have to give all this background. So I just really want to say thank you. It's been a wonderful conversation, and I wish the best to both of you. I hope Faces of the Future gets such a huge following. Just seeing how you hold this space and hold these conversations, eager to go back and look through some of the archives. So I would encourage some of the listeners to do the same.
Amazing. Thank you. Thank you, Glassy.
Well, thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you next time.